Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. Each week after every UFC fight card, I make a video discussing poor performances on that fight card and give my opinion on who needs to be cut from the UFC. But this week, since there was no UFC fight card, I figured I would compile a list of current UFC fighters that I believe need to be cut from the organization for a variety of reasons. Now, this is not every single fighter I think should be cut, because if I made that video, it'd be probably 100 to 150 names long when you look at all the losing streaks and poor performances. But this is the most notable names. I'm going to start with some honorable mentions. Then I'm going to get into my list of actual cuts, saving last on the list for who I believe most needs to be cut from the organization. And there's going to be some shocking cuts on this list. There's going to be some unpopular opinions. But again, this does not encompass every fighter I believe needs to be cut from the organization. Just some of the most egregious fighters that I believe need to be cut. Starting off with the first honorable mention, and that is Neil Magny. Neil Magny has been around for a while. He's been trading wins and losses in his last few fights. His last fight at UFC 292, he got destroyed by Ian Machado Gary. I think one judge even scored the fight 30-24. Utter domination. The fight before that had a split decision win over Philip Rowe. Fight before that got destroyed by Gilbert Burns. Fight before that got a win over Daniel Rodriguez. Fight before that got destroyed by Shavkat Rakhmonov. I just think that Neil Magny at his age, and the fact that he's just losing all these fights and he can't string together any win streak, I think it's getting close to the time that he needs to be cut. But also, I can't get over the fact, and I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me on this, Neil Magny's going into a pre-fight presser talking about how he's going to whoop Ian Machado Gary as badly as he's accustomed to whooping his 3-year-old son. I cannot get over that, and just for that fact, I had to throw him on as an honorable mention. That is outright disturbing, and even though, okay, he's trying to trash talk a little bit, it was just the worst trash talk ever, combined with the actual performance against Ian Machado Gary, where he literally didn't even put up a fight. Neil Magny had to be an honorable mention. Moving on to my next honorable mention, and this one's going to be a little bit unpopular as well, but again, that's why it's an honorable mention. We have Stipe Miocic. Stipe Miocic is fighting for the heavyweight title in November at UFC 295 against Jon Jones. It is one of the most undeserved title shots ever. I understand he's one of the heavyweight GOATs, if not the heavyweight GOAT, but you look at his resume, he has not fought since March of 2021. He's coming up on damn near 3 years since he last fought. In his last fight, all he did was impersonate a lawn chair. He got absolutely wrecked by Francis Ngannou. So he gets brutally KO'd. He sits out for 3 years, almost 3 years, we'll say 2.5 years, answering phones at the fire department, and now he's returning to a title shot. Disgusting behavior by the UFC. And I just hate this fight for so many reasons. So just for that, 41-year-old Stipe Miocic, he needs to be an honorable mention. Moving on to my next honorable mention, and I was really debating about whether or not to put this fighter on the list, but then I decided, you know what? He at least belongs as an honorable mention, even though he skirted away from the list a couple weeks ago, and that is Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, if you wrestled in elementary school, he does not want to fight you. If you own a wrestling singlet, if you've ever touched one, he does not want to fight you. If you watched WWE as a kid, he does not want to fight you. And the reason he's an honorable mention instead of on the actual list is because he was forced into taking a fight against Shavkat Rakhmonov, a guy that he's been ducking for years. The UFC wanted to book this fight for the last year and a half. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson did not want this fight, and he was squatting on a top 10 ranking, meanwhile begging for favorable matchups. He fought Kevin Holland, an unranked striker. Then he got a fight against Michel Pereira, who was ranked far behind him and is only known for his striking. And Wonderboy's just like, oh, you know what? I'm not going to fight him because he's a couple pounds overweight, which I don't necessarily blame him, but at the same time, it's not like you're moving towards a title. And then he turned down Ian Machado Gary, who is a striker, who is a notable name. And I'm like, oh, he's turning down Ian Machado Gary now, and he's saying he wants to fight for a title. And I knew once he did all that, I knew the UFC was going to only offer him Shavkat Rakhmonov. He was forced into that fight. He accepted the fight. Otherwise, he wasn't going to get paid. If he wasn't fighting Shavkat in December at UFC 296, he'd be on the actual list, but we have to give him a little bit of respect for accepting the fight, even though I believe he had no option. The UFC forced his hand. He had to take this fight against Shavkat Rakhmonov. But nonetheless, I know people are going to say, oh, well, he fought Gilbert Burns and Bilal Muhammad. How long ago was that? That was 2021 when he fought Bilal Muhammad and Gilbert Burns. Since then, he has PTSD. He doesn't want to fight anyone who has any takedown ability, but now he's finally fighting Shavkat, who's a well-rounded fighter who has grappling in his arsenal, but he was forced to take the fight, so he only gets a little bit of credit for taking that fight. Moving on to my next honorable mention and my last honorable mention, and that is Michael Chandler. Now, it pained me to put Michael Chandler on this list because he's one of the most exciting fighters ever in the UFC, period. His last fight against Dustin Poirier, incredible fight where he cheated maliciously. So that's another reason why he's on this list as an honorable mention. Cheating nonstop, back of the head shots, fish hooking, blowing his bloody nose into Dustin Poirier's mouth. You look at the fight before that. Brutally front kick KO'd Tony Ferguson. Fight before that, amazing fight against Justin Gaethje. Fight before that, lightweight title fight against Charles Oliveira. Amazing fight. So I don't want to get rid of Michael Chandler, which is why he's an honorable mention. But the way he is brown-nosing Conor McGregor, the way he is sniffing Conor McGregor's asshole, I just can't stand it. It's embarrassing. And he's just sitting on the sideline, hoping and praying for a fight that may never come. And it's just embarrassing at this point. I mean, I honestly believe Michael Chandler would go into the NBA Finals public restroom with Conor McGregor just to get a fight with him. It's so embarrassing the way he's sucking up to him in the media. He's talking about how he asked Siri how many days Conor has to join the USADA pool. It's just embarrassing what he's doing. And I understand that he's nervous. He may not get the fight, and he's trying to suck up to Conor in the media, so hopefully Conor inevitably makes the decision and finally fights him. But the fact that he's basically going to waste a year and a half of his career, because he fought Dustin Poirier in November of 2022. He's not fighting Conor McGregor probably till, at the earliest, I would say maybe UFC 300, which is going to be March, April of 2024. He's wasting his career. Meanwhile, he's just brown-nosing another grown man in the media. It's embarrassing, and that's why Michael Chandler needed to be on this list. I know he's scared. He still may not get this fight. He's probably sitting in his car right now listening to a Creed CD. But if he doesn't get if let's say Conor McGregor decides to fight someone else, at that point, Michael Chandler better get thrown to the wolves. Armin Tsarukyan, Mateusz Gamrot, something along those lines, maybe even Jalen Turner. I want Chandler thrown to the wolves because it's embarrassing that he sat out for all this time, literally brown-nosing another grown man. Moving on to my actual list, and this one's going to be a little bit controversial, and that is Colby Covington. Colby Covington, I want him cut, but kind of with a stipulation. We're going to let him have his title fight against Leon Edwards at UFC 296. But if he loses that fight, I want him gone from the organization. This guy hid in witness protection for basically a year and a half. His last fight was against Jorge Masvidal at UFC 272 back in March of 2022. And everyone wanted to see the Khamzat Chimaev fight. He never said a word. You did not hear a peep out of Colby Covington. The second that Khamzat Chimaev committed to moving to middleweight, all of a sudden Colby's coming out and saying, oh, Khamzat's ducking me and he ran to another weight class and now the UFC's giving him an undeserved title shot against Leon Edwards. I have my theory for that. I think Kamaru Usman was close to pulling out with an injury at UFC 286. Colby Covington flew in on short notice and made weight to save the card, even though Usman inevitably ended up fighting. And I think that's why the UFC is giving him the title fight. But this guy has sat out for so long, and he's returning to a title shot, even though he's 2-2 in his last 4 fights. He lost 2 title fights already against Kamaru Usman, one in which he was TKO'd. And on top of that, you look at his entire UFC resume, he literally does not have a win over a current top 15 welterweight. So I'm happy the welterweight division is finally moving on and we're finally getting a title fight. We've been waiting forever. But if Colby Covington loses to Leon Edwards, he will have now lost his 3rd welterweight title shot. And I know people are going to claim, oh, Colby's so fun, he's such a draw. He doesn't even have a super exciting fight style. I don't think he's boring by any means, but he's not like we couldn't go without seeing him fight. He's 35 years old. He doesn't have a win over a current top 15 rank. It's it's hard to find a win over a fighter who's currently on the UFC roster. He has a couple of those, but one of the worst resumes ever, one of the most undeserved title shots ever. If he loses to Leon Edwards, I want him cut immediately. He's been squatting in the rankings for literally almost 2 years now, and he has no business being ranked number 2 in the welterweight division, coming off a win over the dead body of Jorge Masvidal in 2022. Moving up on my list, we have another kind of high-ranked fighter, and that is Brian Ortega, who is currently ranked number 3 in the featherweight division. Brian Ortega, this is craziness when you say it out loud. He's won one fight since he lost his title fight against Max Holloway all the way back in 2018. He is 1-3 in his last 4 fights, and his only win is against the Korean Zombie back in 2020. That's his only win. That is crazy to me. So since 2018, where he beat Frankie Edgar, he literally has one win in 5 years, and it's against Chan Sung Jung and the Korean Zombie. He lost to Max Holloway in the title fight, got absolutely destroyed. It ended up being a doctor stoppage. He got destroyed by Alexander Volkanovski. People say, oh, it was a competitive fight. It was a great fight. He got literally destroyed. It was a lopsided beatdown outside of 2 close submission attempts. And then he lost to Yair Rodriguez. He got injured, but it was Yair going for an armbar that injured that shoulder. And now he's sat out since then. That was in July of 2022. There's no reason he shouldn't be fighting. He ducked Ilia Topuria. Topuria was begging for that fight. Ortega was like, nah, he's got to fight someone else, blah, blah, blah. Why is he still ranked number 3? Why is he still ranked number 3? Absolutely egregious. Again, he's won one fight since the end of 2018, and it's against the Korean Zombie. Embarrassing. Get rid of Brian Ortega. Cut him immediately. Moving up on my list to a name that honestly I thought about leaving off the list because I'm not sure if he's even still fighting. But that is Alexander Gustafsson. Alexander Gustafsson, I'll never forget your performance at UFC 165 against John Jones, but that's where you peaked. That's where you peaked. You look at his last few fights. He's on a 4-fight losing streak. Got stopped by Nikita Krylov in his last fight in 2022, July of 2022. Hasn't fought since then. Lost to Fabricio Werdum. Got armbarred by Fabricio Werdum at heavyweight. Before that, lost to Anthony Smith. Before that, lost to John Jones. And finally, we got the rematch that everyone wanted. Alexander Gustafsson, his nickname's the Mauler. When's the last time he's mauled anyone? I mean, Glover Teixeira back in 2017. It's been 6 years since the Mauler has mauled anyone. And I know he's flirted with retirement in the past, so maybe he is officially retired, but I haven't heard that. But honestly, 4-fight losing streak has gotten destroyed and finished in quite a few of them. Hasn't looked like himself. I think it's time for Alexander Gustafsson to be cut from the UFC. It really is sad because at one point he was looked at as one of the elite at light heavyweight, but he's 37 years old on a 4-fight losing streak. I don't want to see him fight anymore. Moving up on my list of cuts, next up is one that I talked about recently, and that is Michelle Waterson Gomez. She's on a 4-fight losing streak. She got absolutely destroyed by Marina Rodriguez and finished in the second round in her fight recently, literally last week. And, you know, on top of her being on a 4-fight losing streak and getting absolutely destroyed, she did one of the worst things you could imagine. She brought her young child to watch that. I'm so tired of fighters bringing their young children to literally watch them get destroyed. Anything can happen in MMA. Why are you bringing your child to watch that? She's inflicting psychological pain on her young child, and she just doesn't have the skills anymore. I mean, she never had the skills. She was always just overhyped because people were simping for her and thought she was attractive. She just was a decent kicker. That's it. A decent kicker. She's 37 years old now on a 4-fight losing streak. Got destroyed by Marina Rodriguez. I mean, the beating she put on her was career-altering, life-altering, and life-shortening. Marina Rodriguez really beat her badly, blooded her up, and it just makes me sick that she brought her kid to watch that. I'm absolutely disgusted by that, and for that reason, mainly, she needs to be cut from the organization. Moving up on my list, my next cut is Mike Mathetha. You may know him as a Blood Diamond, but he's not Blood Diamond anymore. You're not allowed to have a nickname like Blood Diamond and fight like Mike Mathetha. So his new name, and he will be referred to as Mike Mathetha from here on out. This guy is horrible. He is terrible. His skill set, his striking, everything about it is horrible. And I know he's inexperienced, but he's just not good at all. He's 3-3 overall in his pro MMA career. He's 35 years old. The fight against Charles Radke was just an abomination on both ends. It was a horribly boring fight, super low skilled fight. And overall, he's had 3 fights in the UFC. He's lost all 3 of those fights. He lost to Jeremiah Wells, got rear naked choke. Lost to Orion Kosei in his last fight, got decision. Lost to Charles Radke in his most recent fights. And it's just, I mean, Mike Mathetha, he only got in the UFC because he was training with Israel Adesanya. I don't want to see this guy fight anymore. I don't want to see him fight in the UFC. How is this where we've gotten to in terms of skill level being allowed in the UFC? Mike Mathetha would have been laughed out of the UFC at even a potential shot at the UFC 5-6 years ago. Why are we allowing guys like this who literally looks like he literally fought against Charles Radke like he had some type of disability, like he was freezing up, his body wasn't moving right, he was drunk or something? How are we letting that low of skill level fight in the best organization in the world where it's supposed to be the best versus the best? He's put on terrible performances. The only fight out of the 3 that was decent was against Jeremiah Wells, and that's only because Jeremiah Wells is running around the side of the cage and tripping over himself before finding a finish. But outside of that, he doesn't belong in the UFC. He doesn't belong to call himself Blood Diamond. Mike Mathetha needs to be cut from the organization immediately. Moving up on my list, and this is one that actually kind of pains me to do, and I've talked about this kind of fairly recently as well. That is Chris Weidman. Chris Weidman, former middleweight champion, who is currently 39 years old, knocking on the door of 40 years old. And you look at his most recent fights, lost to Brad Tavares, took an absolute beating in that fight. And his leg that was broken previously against Uriah Hall, it didn't look right in this fight. It looked like it was dragging. It just didn't look right. And it didn't look like he could fight to the best of his ability. You look at the fight before that, broke his leg against Uriah Hall. The fight before that got a win over Omari Akhmedov, but looked like garbage doing it. Both guys looked horrible in that fight. I'll never forget that because it was just so bad. Fight before that got absolutely dominated and destroyed by the dead body, the now dead body of Dominic Reyes. Fight before that got KO'd by Jacare Souza. I mean, you look at Chris Weidman's overall career. Since he lost his title to Luke Rockhold all the way back in 2015, he has 2 wins. One against Kelvin Gastelum, super undersized for the weight class, and one against Omari Akhmedov. And look at how the amount of times he's been finished. He got finished by Luke Rockhold, and he took career-altering damage in that fight. Then he gets flying knee KO'd by Yoel Romero. Then he gets brutalized by Gegard Mousasi. He gets the win against Kelvin Gastelum, fair enough. Gets absolutely wrecked by Jacare Souza in the 3rd round where he catches that punch right on the forehead and kind of folds back. Next fight after that, Dominic Reyes. Next fight after that, Uriah Hall. Next fight after that, Brad Tavares in a return. He's 39 years old. He's been getting finished nonstop. In his overall MMA career, he has 6 losses. All 6 of those, or he has 7 losses. 6 of those 7 losses are via KO or TKO. I don't want to see him take any more CT. I don't want to see him take any more brain damage. I don't want to see that leg limp around. And supposedly he tore his ACL or tore some ligaments in his knee of his non-broken leg, I think it was. They announced after the fight. I don't want to see Weidman take any more damage. It's hard to watch. It really is. He isn't the fighter that he once was. He needs to be cut from the organization immediately. Moving up on my list to my next cut, and that is Kron Gracie. Kron Gracie is only on a 2-fight losing streak. He lost to Charles Jourdain at UFC 288 earlier this year. But the level of butt scooting I saw in that fight, he needed to be on this list. I mean, the fact that he's dragging his ass on the canvas like a dog itches their ass on the carpet was so embarrassing. And he's only gotten in the UFC based on his name. His last name is Gracie. That's the only reason they gave him an opportunity. He's a specialist, a jiu-jitsu specialist. He's 5-2 overall. The fact that Alex Caceres lost to him in 2019, I want to put Alex Caceres on this list. He lost to Cub Swanson, lost to Charles Jourdain, really didn't look good in either one of those fights. And if you were ever butt scooting across the canvas for long periods of time in any fight, you need to be cut from the organization. The striking is non-existent. Does he even have a striking coach? Is he even hitting any pads? I don't think that he is. I'm not even sure that he's training the fight because all he's doing is going out there and he looks like one of those one championships BJJ matches where they just lay on their butt and they scoot around. It's embarrassing. It's outright embarrassing. He may have already been cut from the UFC. I don't think he has. I haven't seen that anywhere. But if he's not, just for that performance against Charles Jourdain alone, I don't care if before that he was undefeated in the UFC, which he wasn't because he got dominated by Cub Swanson. Just for that butt scooting alone, you need to be cut from the organization. Get rid of Kron Gracie immediately. Just because he has the last name Gracie doesn't mean he belongs in the UFC. Moving up on my list, next on the list, we have Chris Daukaus. Chris Daukaus, former heavyweight who went down to light heavyweight, got destroyed there as well. You look at his last few fights, 4 losses, all 4 of them by KO or TKO. He quit his job as a full-time police officer because he decided, you know what, I'm going to be a full-time fighter. I'm going to dedicate my life to fighting. And then after that, gets absolutely wrecked by Derek Lewis. After that, gets absolutely wrecked by Curtis Blades. After that, gets absolutely wrecked by Jairzinho Rozenstruik. After that, now he says, oh, you know what? Maybe I made the wrong decision. I'm fighting a heavyweight. I need to fight at light heavyweight. Moves down to light heavyweight, gets wrecked by Khalil Roundtree. He needs to go get his job back. He needs to call the fire department where Steve A works, maybe ask him for a job there. I don't want to see him fight anymore. The level of CTE that he's absorbed over the last 2 years, it's irreversible. I mean, the fact that he's just getting KO'd fight after fight after fight. At this point, I'd be shocked to see him not get KO'd. And you look at his overall career, he has 6 losses by KO or TKO. 4 of those are in the first round. He has no chin. He has a glass chin. He's taken so much damage. I really don't want to see him fight anymore. He's only 34 years old. So at one point in time, people were acting like he had some potential in the heavyweight division just because he was kind of a little bit faster than some of the slower heavyweights. 12-7 overall pro MMA record. It just makes no sense to keep him in the UFC. He needs to be cut from the organization. And while we're at it, Chris Daukaus, if you're watching this, fire your manager. Why are you accepting fights like Khalil Roundtree, Jairzinho Rozenstruik, Curtis Blades, Derek Lewis, all back to back to back? You couldn't wait it out and get a somewhat favorable matchup, maybe someone with a little less power. It just makes no sense. So fire your manager immediately. But Chris Daukaus has taken entirely way too much damage. He's been KO'd so many times. He's going to be brain dead at this point by the time he's 45 years old. He needs to be cut from the organization. Maybe he can go to a smaller organization and have some success there. Moving on to my next cut, and I really struggled with the placement of this entire list. Honestly, it was hard to really place who belongs above who, but my next cut is Cody Brundage. Cody Brundage, he won his last fight against Jacob Malkoun literally last week. This guy is an absolute bum, and he's just showing up and trying to find a way to quit for a paycheck. He was getting destroyed by Jacob Malkoun, and there was an elbow that landed at the back of the head area, but it was more the neck. It didn't land flush at all. The elbow didn't even actually land. It was more the forearm. And you have Mark Smith stopping the fight because of it, because Cody Brundage complains, and then after he complains, he looks dead at the ref and complains. All of a sudden, it's like somebody hit him over the head with a cinder block out of a 3rd-story building. It was the most disgusting performance I've ever seen. A lot of people say, oh, we need to give him an Academy Award. I wouldn't give him an Academy Award for that. It was the worst acting performance I've ever seen. He was not hurt. He just wanted a way out. And I just think to try to get a win like that and then to succeed is just one of the most egregious things I've seen in MMA, and I'm disgusted with Cody Brundage. I mean, he goes out there and just quits. He didn't even want to be there. He showed up against Jacob Malkoun. He packed it in literally after 10 seconds. Forget about the back of the head shot. He had already quit long before that back of the head shot landed. He was just curled up in a ball, just doing nothing, waiting for the ref to stop it, and he moved right into that back of the head shot, which wasn't necessarily his fault, but it wasn't necessarily Jacob Malkoun's fault either. I understand he's supposed to be in control of his own weapons. It should have been a no contest. The fact that they gave Cody Brundage a DQ win it drives me nuts. It absolutely drives me nuts. And then you look at his recent performances again. Before that, Cedriquez Dumas. He goes out there, loses to Cedriquez Dumas. But fight before that, pulling guillotines against Rodolfo Vieira, loses that fight, gets submitted there. Fight before that, Mikel Olashechek loses there, gets finished there. So literally, you're talking about he should be on a 4-fight losing streak. Cody Brundage is a literal bum. I never want to see him fight in the organization ever again. Dude milked a back of the head shot that didn't even really land. He wasn't hurt at all. And he's literally acting like he got hit by a car. So embarrassing. His family should disown him. You know, his wife, if he has a wife or girlfriend or fiance, they need to break up with him or divorce him. And honestly, he needs to go into witness protection and change his name, because that was some of the most embarrassing performances I've ever seen in his last few fights. Cody Brundage needs to be cut from the organization. Moving up on my list, talk about embarrassing performances. Next up, we have Chelsea Chandler. Chelsea Chandler's only on a 1-fight losing streak. She only lost her last fight against Norma Dumont. The way she got hit and turned her back and sprinted away like she was running for her life until she ran face first into the cage, It may have been the most embarrassing moment I've ever seen in MMA. I mean, honestly, what Chelsea Chandler did in that fight made Cody Brundage not that embarrassing, to be honest. Now I'm thinking of Cody Brundage, maybe I'm too hard on him. I mean, when you have Chelsea Chandler, what she did in the cage making me feel like, am I being too hard on Cody Brundage? This was embarrassing. How could she even look at herself in the mirror after this? She turned her back completely to her opponent and sprinted. Her hands were moving like this until she ran face forward into the cage. If that cage wasn't there, who knows where she would be now? She'd be in another state. I really don't know where she would be. It was embarrassing. And the fact that she lost that fight, she got basically dominated in that fight. The fact that she did that, I mean, I've never seen anyone do that ever. I mean, the closest we got was CJ Vergara, who did that previous to her, but at least he was running in circles. He wasn't running in a straight line like, I got to get out of here, It was like someone yelled fire. She was trying to get out. She thought the building was on fire. This was one of the most embarrassing physical acts I've ever seen in the cage in my entire life. It was so bad. She needs to be cut from the UFC. I don't ever want to see her fight again. All I'm going to think about, they better show that in her highlight package. When they're previewing the fight, they need to throw that in the highlight package immediately, because that was one of the most embarrassing things I've ever seen, and she needs to be reminded of it every time she fights. Moving up on my list, next up, we don't really have a cut, but this person needs to be fired from their job, and that is Mike Bell. He is a judge who works for the Nevada State Athletic Commission. He scored round 5 for Grasso versus Shevchenko 2, a 10-8 round for Grasso. An unacceptable scorecard, an egregious scorecard, a scorecard devoid of logic. I don't know what he was watching. The only excuse for that type of scorecard is he had some type of medical event and he wrote down the wrong thing, or someone misinterpreted it. I don't understand how you could ever score a 10-8 for Grasso in that fight. I personally, and I know people disagree with me on this, I thought you could have gave the fight, or not the fight. I thought you could have gave the fight, but I thought you can give the 5th round to Valentina Shevchenko. I thought Valentina Shevchenko won the fight for the first 4 minutes, 4.5 or 3.5 minutes. So how does Grasso getting a takedown and some control time and looking for a rear naked and a little bit of ground and pound, how does that get her a 10-8 round? If you want to give it to Grasso, fair enough, whatever. I'm not going to argue that. But 10-8? 10-8 means basically utter domination. That's what a 10-8 means, where there's prolonged dominance in a round where a lot of damage is done. That didn't exist. And even if you don't believe me, don't take my word for it. Take the Nevada State Athletic Commission's word for it, because they did a seminar afterwards on 10-8. They had people anonymously judge that 5th round, and everyone had it a 10-9 for Grasso. Now, I believe in their heads, they were already thinking it's a round for Grasso, whether it's a 10-8 or 10-9, but every single one of them gave it a 10-9. Mike Bell should be embarrassed of this scorecard. I'm disgusted with the scorecard. And people are like, oh, he's been historically a good judge. He's been great. He's usually not in some of these controversial scorecards. I don't care. I literally don't care. You can't make this type of mistake. Imagine you have a surgeon who's like, yeah, I've done thousands of surgeries, all of them gone well, except that one where I was working on somebody's neck and I actually left some screws and bolts inside there before I sewed them up and I forgot about them. I'm not going with that surgeon. I don't care. This one decision is so egregious, he deserves to never score a fight again. Give him the job. Give him the fight. He can just use the little clapper. He can do the 10-second clapper. That's all he's good for. I don't trust him to make any other decisions. Honestly, I would have someone babysitting him while he hit the 10-second clapper as well. He should never score another fight again. That is a horrific scorecard. 10-8, 5th round for Grasso. I don't even know how he came to that conclusion. Absolutely disgusting scorecard. And I don't remember any other scorecards that he had that were bad over the past few years, but that's the only one I need to know, because that is horrible decision making. I don't know what Mike Bell was watching in the Grasso versus Shevchenko fight. Moving up on my list, again, this is not even a cut per se, but the UFC needs to cut the entire commentary team of Joe Rogan, Michael Bisping, and Dominic Cruz. I could go on for days about this. Joe Rogan is now a casual. Joe Rogan just shows up. He doesn't know what weight class fighters are in. And all he does is play it up for the camera. Oh, let me lean back and grab one to whoever's commentating with me and make it seem like my eyes are bulging out of my head and give the most extreme reaction. Then half the time, he's not even talking about what's going on. He's having some weird side conversation with Daniel Cormier. And I think Daniel Cormier is a little bit better when he's not with Rogan. And it's just, Rogan doesn't even know what's going on anymore. And he comes in with preconceived narratives. And no matter what he sees, he can't deviate from that narrative. You know, he came in thinking Adesanya is definitely going to beat Jan Blachowicz, and then all he did was talk about Adesanya's feints the entire fight. It's just, Joe Rogan's time has passed. And I know people are going to say, how dare you say that about Joe Rogan? If you compare Joe Rogan now of 2023 to Joe Rogan of like 2016, 2015, it's not even comparable. Joe Rogan, there used to be a day where I used to be sad when Rogan wasn't on the card. Now I pray for the days where Rogan misses a pay-per-view because he is so horrible at commentating. Now, as far as the other commentators, Michael Bisping, where do I even begin? He's probably the worst of all of them. I mean, Joe Rogan's amazing compared to Bisping. Bisping doesn't know what he's watching. He doesn't know how to judge a fight. He doesn't know the rules. He's making corny jokes the entire time. He's not talking about the action. I could go on and on and on about Michael Bisping. Michael Bisping is probably the worst UFC commentator there is. I can't stand Michael Bisping. Doesn't know what he's talking about. Doesn't know anything about the sport, it seems. And I know he's only got one eye, but it's like he's making corny, cliche jokes instead of actually watching the fights and talking about what action is going on. And he'll miss a big moment in the fight because he's too busy saying some dumb shit to the other commentators. Then you have Dominic Cruz, who Dominic Cruz used to be really good. He's gotten worse and worse over the years. Now he doesn't even know how the scoring criteria works. He's consistently acting like a later round damage done, like a cut in the third round. He acts like judges go back and revisit the first and second round and rescore those rounds based on damage done in the third round. It makes no sense. He doesn't understand it, and he convinces fans of this. And then he'll be talking about decisions made by referees that are maybe not even bad decisions, but because he has a grudge against referees because he doesn't like the way Keith Peterson stopped the fight years ago, he's making the fans believe it's a bad decision. I'll never forget, I think it was Chris Taioni stopped the fight due to a choke where a guy looked like he went unconscious, and Cruz was all over him. The guy's arm clearly went limp, and I think it should have been a stoppage. It should have been a win for, I think it was Charez. I think it was Charez who should have won that fight. But Dominic Cruz is just lighting into the ref and saying what a horrible decision it was and that he got scared and shouldn't have stopped the fight. Meanwhile, the guy checked his arm 6 times. He was moving, then the arm went limp. He stopped the fight. The guy woke back up. Dominic Cruz is a horrible commentator, but mainly it's the scoring criteria that he doesn't understand and the way the damage-based scoring is done. But overall, I want Joe Rogan, I want Michael Bisping, and I want Dominic Cruz gone. If I can only pick one, Michael Bisping. Moving up on the list, and this one's actually really sad as well, and that is the dead body of Dominic Reyes. I don't want to see Dominic Reyes fight anymore. I really don't. I mean, his nickname is the Devastator. When's the last time he's devastated anyone? When's the last time he's literally devastated anyone? Let me take a look at his resume. Oh, it was Chris Weidman all the way back in 2019. It's been 4 years since he's gotten a win. He's on a 4-fight losing streak. He literally got KO'd by Ryan Spann with a jab. He got KO'd by Ryan Spann with a jab. The guy is literally brain dead at this point. He is brain dead. I feel bad for him. The fight before that gets brutally slapped by a spinning back elbow from Yuri Prohaska. You know, I'll never forget the way he fell to the canvas. Literally a dead body. Fight before that gets destroyed by Jan Blachowicz. Fight before that lost to John Jones in a very close fight that a lot of people thought Dominic Reyes should have won that fight. And I felt like Dominic Reyes was so caught up on that one performance and he convinced himself he's the best in the world. He just had a downslope after that. I talk about it all the time. We can't elevate guys off of a loss, let alone one loss. He had a close fight with John Jones, who's considered the GOAT, and people were elevating Dom Reyes to this massive pedestal, like he was the best fighter ever because he had this close fight and arguably won against John Jones. That could have been John Jones' worst night ever. That could have been a fight that he didn't take seriously. It's one fight you're taking into account. You look at the fights before that, he didn't even really have any good quality wins outside of Volkan Ozdemir, which is a split decision win. That's a lot of people thought Ozdemir won that fight. You're looking at Chris Weidman. Okay, it was okay at the time. OSP, okay. Jared Cannonier wasn't even that great at the time at light heavyweight. So he had a horrible resume even going into the John Jones fight. He fought John Jones very close, arguably won the fight, and then I think in his mind, he was like, I'm the best in the world. Then he goes in against Jan Blachowicz and finds out he's not. Then he goes in against Yuri Prohaska, gets slept. Then he goes in against Ryan Spann, gets slept. I don't want to see him take any more damage. And that's why he's so high on this list, because Dom Reyes, it's really sad. It's just like the John Jones curse. He's taken so much damage now. He's got such a glass jaw. I mean, I feel like if he gets hit by a blowing tumbleweed, I feel like Dominic Reyes is going to go to sleep. I can't watch him fight anymore. He needs to be cut from the organization. Honestly, I've talked about this before. If the UFC isn't going to cut him, and let's say Alexander Gustafsson is still fighting, book Dom Reyes versus Alexander Gustafsson. Loser leaves town. Winner at least gets back on the winning track. But honestly, I don't want to see either one of those guys fight ever again. Dominic Reyes is done. He is a dead body. Moving up on my list, this is actually my second to last cut on my list. This is going to be a super long video. But the next cut is UFC referee Mark Smith, who is technically a referee for the Nevada State Athletic Commission. Mark Smith, what drives me nuts is people act like he's a good ref. He is an atrocious ref, whether it be late stoppages, whether it be early stoppages, whether it be dealing with the actual rule set. This guy, and I have to make a reffing video in the next month or two. I don't understand these refs, and in particular, Mark Smith is one of the, one of the refs that does this the most. Is your job to enforce the rules, or is your job just to shout the rules at the fighters for the entirety of the fight? Because Mark Smith, he'll watch fouls being committed, and he'll say, "Don't grab the fence. Don't grab the fence. Don't grab the fence. Get the fingers out of the eye. Keep those shots up. Don't kick him in the groin. Don't kick him in the nuts. Oh, he's a downed opponent." But he doesn't actually enforce the rules most of the time. When people are grabbing the fence, he's just screaming, "Don't grab the fence." Like, is your job to remind them of the rules or to enforce the rules? And then you have the whole Cody Brundage situation, which I think was completely mishandled, where he DQ'd Malkoun for a shot that didn't even really have any significant impact. Then you go back to the Aljamain Sterling, Petr Yan situation. Mark Smith, the loudest whisperer I've ever heard. He literally ruined Petr Yan's career by whispering so loudly to the doctor, who has no say in what the result is. He whispered to the doctor loudly. He basically screamed it. If Aljo can't continue, it's going to be a disqualification. All of a sudden, Aljo heard that, starts flailing back and acts like he got hit by a vehicle. That is all Mark Smith's fault. And he set a precedent where guys start milking illegal shots, inadvertent shots, in an attempt to get a DQ win. And that's what he did. He set the precedent for Cody Brundage. And what does he do? He gives Cody Brundage a DQ win. Then you have blatant illegal fouls ignored by Mark Smith. There was a fight on Dana White's Contender Series this past week. If you want to, I'll put it down in the comments, because I don't remember who exactly was fighting. There was a blatantly illegal knee. A guy was down on one knee, but he also had two hands posted, or one hand posted as well. But either way, he was down clearly on one knee. It wasn't even up for debate. He was leaning up against the fence. This guy threw a blatant illegal knee. And Mark Smith watches him eat this illegal knee that does significant damage. And Mark Smith just yells, "Oh, he's down. He's down." He doesn't do anything about it. He doesn't break him. He just says, "Oh, he's down." It is a blatant, it's not even up for interpretation. It is a blatant illegal knee. All this guy is good for is messing up calls. All this guy is good for is, I think he likes to hear his voice on TV. I'm dead serious. He constantly is talking nonstop. And I think he likes to see himself on TV as well, because it seems like he's constantly trying to get in the way of the camera instead of getting in positioning to maybe stop a fight due to a TKO or a potential submission where somebody goes unconscious or somebody's tapping. It's like, oh, am I in the camera frame? Am I in the camera frame? That's all Mark Smith seems to do. And for whatever reason, people say, oh, Mark Smith's a great ref. Mark Smith is a horrible referee. We need to get rid of him immediately. He does not know what he's doing. Get rid of him immediately. Moving on to my last cut, and this one actually breaks my heart. It really does break my heart. And this is kind of going to be two cuts, but it's really mainly one cut, but you'll understand what I'm saying in a second. The last cut on the list is Tony El Cucuy Ferguson. The man is on a 6-fight losing streak, and he has a fight coming up at UFC 296 against Paddy Pimblett, which I absolutely hate, but I kind of love in a weird way. It's time, Tony. People say that, oh, it went from it's Tony time to it's time, Tony. It's time, Tony. Retire. Give it up. Give it up. You're 39 years old. You're on a 6-fight losing streak. I can't watch this anymore. Tony Ferguson was one of my favorite fighters ever to watch. The way he would press forward, the way he would make guys fold, the way he would use his pressure was just something to behold when he was in his prime. but his style was not conducive to longevity. When your main style is just to press forward and break guys with your stamina, it's not going to last forever because Tony relied on his durability a little bit too much. And you look at his overall losing streak, got absolutely destroyed by Justin Gaethje, lost to Charles Oliveira, got dominated there, got dominated by Beneil Dariush, was winning against Michael Chandler, but then got his head punted off in the second round, which I really think changed him. Then lost to Nate Diaz in a fight where he looked, I mean, that was the fight where he really became a dead body. Tony Ferguson is a dead body. Then he fights Bobby Green, looks good in the first round, looks okay in the first round, gets arm triangled in the third round. I just can't watch this anymore. I can't subject myself to this anymore. 6-fight losing streak and he's still not cut. And I'm really worried. What really disgusts me about Tony Ferguson, I'm worried about a Chris Benoit situation. And I made an entire video, the rise and fall of Tony Ferguson. I'll put that down in the description if you guys want to go check that out. But I'm really worried. Like, Tony doesn't seem like he wants to hang it up ever. Like he's talking about matching his 12-fight win streak with a 12-fight losing streak. And now you have a point where the UFC's feeding him to somebody like Paddy Pimblett, where the UFC is going to act like it's a good win by Paddy Pimblett, but at the same time, they're going to say, yeah, Tony shouldn't fight anymore. They're probably going to cut him. Who knows where he might go? Bare Knuckle, Bellator, PFL. I hope none of them sign him. But at the same time, what is he going to do? I feel like this is all Tony has. And this is really one of the most depressing stories in MMA. But Tony Ferguson should not be fighting. I don't want to see him go down the Bigfoot Silva route. If you look at his overall, recent losses, he's only really been KO'd the one time against Michael Chandler in his recent losses. Now, I understand he took a lot of damage against Justin Gaethje, but even the other fights, it's not like he took a lot of damage against Bobby Green or Nate Diaz or even Beneil Dariush. He took some damage and Charles Oliveira, some damage, but he really only took the major damage against Michael Chandler and Justin Gaethje. I feel like he can get out with some brain cells still, but I feel like he's just not going to, and I hope the UFC, I don't know what I want the UFC to do. They need to cut him, but I don't want him to go anywhere else. Can they pay him to do a different job? Like, have him sign autographs, be a brand ambassador. I don't know, catch people at Power Slap. At this point, catch people at Power Slap. I just don't want to see Tony fight anymore. It's really sad to see the boogeyman of the lightweight division literally slowly transform into one of the worst fighters on the roster. I hope he beats Paddy Pimblett. I'm praying to the MMA gods. There's nothing I would want more than Tony Ferguson to defeat Paddy Pimblett and retire, walk off into the sunset, ride off into the sunset, play a beautiful Robbie Lawler-esque package. I can't watch him continue to lose anymore. At this point, send him to the Kentucky State Fair. Let him beat up on some bums for $150 in a funnel cake. I don't care. I just don't want to watch Tony get beat up anymore. I can't be subjected to this anymore. And also, cut Tony Ferguson's manager. I'm not 100% sure whose management group is. I looked it up. It's his Ballingy management group. I know at one point he was with Paradigm Sports Management. But why are they accepting these fights? I mean, Justin Gaethje, Charles Oliveira, Beneil Dariush, Michael Chandler, back to back to back to back. The only fight they should have took was Nate Diaz, and they took that on 24 hours notice, and they took a 3-week notice fight with Li Jingliang, who he would have got brutally KO'd against. So I don't know what his management group is doing. I guess the Paddy Pimblett fight is at least a winnable fight, but at the same time, he needs to get rid of his management group, find a new manager who's going to talk to him and say, you know what, Tony, let's get you some other gigs. Let's find you something to work for the UFC. I can't watch Tony Ferguson fight anymore. It is breaking my heart. So that is my entire list of cuts. Honestly, it could have been a mile longer, but I think it ended up being about 20 cuts. Let me know who I missed. Who were some of the most egregious cuts that should have been on this list, of egregious fighting, losing streaks and whatnot. Who did I miss? Let me know in the comments. Do you disagree with any of these cuts? Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe, and thank you so much for watching.